History loves to pretend geniuses were elegant, disciplined, and permanently one step above the rest of us. Not exactly. Some of the smartest people ever were hiding manuscripts from visitors, sleeping like malfunctioning robots, bathing in bizarre rituals, and treating absolute nonsense like sacred law. These are 32 bizarre daily habits of history's greatest geniuses, and honestly, the talent was incredible, but the behavior was completely unhinged. 1. Abraham Lincoln did not just wear that famous stovepipe hat because it made him look tall, solemn, and presidential. The thing was basically his walking desk drawer. Lincoln had a chronic talent for misplacing important papers, which is not ideal when you are a lawyer, a politician, and eventually the man trying to hold a country together. So he turned the inside of his hat into storage space for letters, legal notes, speech drafts, and unpaid bills. Need a document? Off comes the hat, hand goes in, problem solved. It was practical, ridiculous, and somehow perfectly on brand for him. There is something wonderfully chaotic about imagining one of the most important figures in American history strolling around with state-level thoughts and random paperwork stuffed above his forehead like a human filing cabinet with sideburns. 2. Jane Austen wrote some of the sharpest social comedy in English literature, but her actual writing setup was less grand literary salon and more low-budget undercover operation. In her time, a woman publicly writing novels could be judged as improper, so Austen kept her work deliberately hidden. She used tiny sheets of paper that could vanish under a blotter in seconds if somebody wandered in. And her greatest security system was not a lock, not a servant, not even common privacy. It was a squeaky door hinge. She intentionally left the door unoiled because the loud creak gave her advance warning that company was coming. That gave her just enough time to hide the evidence of her scandalous activity, which was, hilariously, sitting quietly and writing excellent fiction. So yes, one of literature's greatest geniuses relied on a badly maintained door like she was running a secret intelligence operation. 3. Marie Antoinette did not just live extravagantly. She managed to turn extravagance into performance art. Exhausted by the rigid ceremony of Versailles, she decided what she really needed was a pretend rustic escape, so she had an entire idealized peasant village built on palace grounds. This was the Émaux de la Reine, a fantasy farm complete with cottages, livestock, a dairy, a mill, and all the cozy countryside vibes money could buy. Then, the queen and her inner circle would show up wearing carefully designed, simple peasant outfits made from expensive fabrics, strolling around as if they had just discovered hard work in a highly curated environment. They could play shepherdess, gather eggs, and act enchanted by rural life without ever experiencing actual poverty, hunger, or tax pressure. It was basically luxury cosplay for aristocrats, which is an almost offensively perfect symbol of how detached the French court had become. 4. Albert Einstein could rethink time, space, gravity, and the structure of reality, yet one of the things he truly rejected was socks. He thought they were annoying, unnecessary, and doomed to fail anyway because his big toe would always punch a hole through them. So he simply stopped bothering, even when dressed formally. That alone would make him delightfully eccentric, but then his snack choices decided to push the whole image into another dimension. According to reports, Einstein would occasionally grab a grasshopper and eat it with the casual attitude of a man picking up a peanut. No ceremony, no hesitation, just outdoor protein and onward to the mysteries of the universe. So picture it. One of the greatest scientific minds in history, sockless in proper shoes, chewing an insect while mentally reorganizing physics. Honestly, if anyone had earned the right to ignore normal human behavior, it was probably him. 5. Coco Chanel built an empire on elegance, discipline, and ruthless taste. But beneath all that polished sophistication sat an almost comically intense superstition. She was obsessed with the number 5. Not mildly fond of it. Obsessed. She treated it like a private source of cosmic protection, the magic digit that kept fortune on her side. That fixation seeped into everything she created. Her most famous perfume became Chanel No. 5. She liked unveiling collections on the 5th day of the 5th month. Even the design elements in her apartment reflected the number in decorative patterns and shapes. For someone whose public image screamed clean lines and cool control, There was a very unminimal little engine of numerology humming under the surface. It is a great reminder that genius and irrationality are often roommates. Chanel could simplify fashion for millions of women, but she still let one lucky number run around backstage like it owned the place. 6. If you think your coffee habit is intense because you drink 3 cups before noon, Honoré de Balzac would like to laugh directly in your face. The man wrote like he was being chased by deadlines from another planet, and his fuel was coffee in quantities that sound medically irresponsible even by writer standards. Reports claim he could drink up to 50 cups a day, often thick, strong, and brutal enough to wake the dead. And when liquid coffee stopped doing the trick, he apparently upgraded to just eating the grounds outright for a faster hit. No breakfast, no moderation, no concern for organs or peace. Just raw caffeine and literary ambition. This was the engine behind his enormous body of work, including the massive project known as the Human Comedy. Balzac did not merely consume coffee. He entered into a toxic spiritual merger with it and somehow turned that tremoring chaos into novels. 7. Arnold Schonberg helped blow up the rules of classical music and rebuild them in a radically new form. Yet for all his intellectual daring, he was absolutely terrified of one thing: the number 13. His triskaidekaphobia was not a cute quirk. It ran his life like an unpaid tyrant. He dodged the number wherever possible, even in his compositions, replacing 13 with 12a, as though basic arithmetic might politely cooperate with panic. When he realized his opera title, Moses and Aaron, would have 13 letters. If Aaron were spelled the usual way, he literally changed the spelling to dodge the curse. Then things got even more unsettling when he turned 76, and someone pointed out that 7 plus 6 equals 13. Wonderful. Exactly what an anxious genius needs. On Friday, July 13, 1951, Schonberg reportedly stayed in bed all day in fear and died that night at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight. Honestly, even fate seemed committed to the bit. 8. Leonardo da Vinci apparently looked at the normal human sleep schedule and decided it was an inefficient obstacle invented by weaker minds. To squeeze more working hours out of existence, he is said to have followed a polyphasic routine, taking short naps roughly every 4 hours instead of sleeping in one long block. That meant maybe 2 hours of sleep a day, total, which sounds less like a productivity hack and more like a direct challenge to biology itself. The idea was simple: spend less time unconscious, spend more time painting, dissecting, sketching machines, studying anatomy, and casually being Leonardo da Vinci. Modern science is not exactly throwing confetti over this plan, and the long-term sustainability is questionable at best, but the image is incredible. While everyone else accepted sunrise and sunset like reasonable people, Leonardo seems to have tried negotiating with time itself. Of course he did. A normal schedule was never going to be enough for a man whose curiosity had no brakes. 9. Friedrich Schiller, one of Germany's great literary minds, apparently needed his workspace to smell like a fruit basket that had died in suspicious circumstances. He believed the scent of rotting apples sharpened his creativity, so he kept decaying fruit in his desk drawer on purpose. Not by accident, not because he forgot about them, on purpose. Friends complained, his wife was disgusted, and anyone entering the room likely had to decide whether they were visiting a poet or investigating a storage problem. But Schiller insisted the smell helped him write. Somehow, the sweet foulness of decomposition was his ideal artistic atmosphere. Most people light candles or open windows when a room starts smelling like spoiled produce. Schiller apparently inhaled deeper and got to work. It is such a magnificently weird image. One of Europe's celebrated writers sitting in a cloud of dead apple vapor, turning olfactory disaster into literature, while everyone nearby quietly reconsiders the meaning of genius. 10. Napoleon Bonaparte marched armies across Europe, outmaneuvered coalitions, terrified monarchs, and made history bend around his ambition. Yet according to long-running stories, one ordinary house cat could reduce all that imperial thunder to pure nervous misery. Napoleon was said to suffer from phobia. An intense fear of cats, which means the man who stared down cannon fire might have been psychologically defeated by a creature that spends 16 hours a day sleeping and judging furniture. The contrast is almost too perfect. Imagine this famously commanding figure, master of strategy and battlefield dominance, suddenly losing composure because a small cat wandered into the room with zero respect for rank. Whether every detail of the tale is true or not, it survives because it feels so deliciously absurd. History loves a humbling detail, and nothing humbles an emperor faster than the possibility that somewhere nearby is a fluffy little animal completely unimpressed by empire, glory, or military genius. 11. Søren Kierkegaard spent his career dissecting anxiety, dread, despair, and all the other emotional weather systems that make human existence feel like a philosophical trap. His writing came in intense bursts, the kind that leave a person mentally wrung out like a towel. And after those storms of thought, he reportedly had a very odd way of recovering. He would lie down on the floor and roll across the room, just roll. No elegant explanation, no obvious symbolic framework, no dramatic audience. Maybe it helped discharge nervous energy. Maybe it grounded him after hours floating in abstract thought. Maybe he was simply too exhausted to care how ridiculous it looked. Whatever the reason, it gives us a glorious image of one of philosophy's most serious minds log-rolling around his study like a deeply troubled human croissant. Which honestly feels weirdly fitting. If anyone understood that existence itself is absurd, it was probably the man spinning across the carpet after writing about despair. 12. Salvador Dali did not even nap like a normal person. Of course he did not. His method for mining the surreal material of the subconscious was what he called slumber with a key, which sounds theatrical because it absolutely was. He would sit in a chair holding a metal key between his fingers with a plate placed on the floor below. Then, he would drift towards sleep. The moment he actually slipped under, his hand relaxed, the key dropped, smashed against the plate, and the clang yanked him awake. That tiny slice of half-sleep, the strange borderland between waking logic and dream nonsense, was exactly what he wanted. He believed it let him catch the bizarre images forming in the mind before they vanished. So yes, Dali basically built an alarm system for hallucinations. It may be the most dramatic possible way to take a near-microscopic nap, but for a man like Dali, even resting had to arrive dressed for the stage. 13. Igor Stravinsky, the composer whose work helped shove classical music into the modern age, started his mornings by doing something that sounds less like artistic preparation and more like an accidental yoga dare. Every day, for about 15 minutes, he stood on his head. He believed it refreshed him, improved his health, and cleared his mind for composition. This was not some occasional stunt. It was part of the routine. So before writing music that could scandalize audiences and rewrite expectations, Stravinsky would literally turn himself upside down and wait for inspiration to settle into place. There is something almost too perfect about it. A man known for disrupting musical order began his workday by physically reversing the world. Perhaps that was the point. Maybe genius sometimes needs a reminder that the normal angle of reality is optional. Or maybe he just found that blood rushing to the brain was cheaper than coffee. Either way, it is hard to argue with results that dramatic. 14. Frank Sinatra looked effortless in public. Smooth voice, smooth posture, smooth everything. But behind that legendary cool was a man reportedly locked in a relentless private war with germs. His fear of contamination was intense, shaped by obsessive-compulsive tendencies that made cleanliness feel less like preference and more like survival. He washed his hands constantly, took shower after shower, and demanded extreme order in his surroundings. In dressing rooms, he wanted exactly 12 clean towels ready and waiting. Not 11, not 13, 12. This was not glamorous celebrity fussiness for the sake of spectacle. It was part ritual, part defense mechanism, part attempt to quiet a mind that would not stop ringing alarm bells. That contrast is what makes it so striking. The man who could command a room with total confidence was, in private, trying to negotiate peace with invisible threats. Behind all that velvet charm was someone scrubbing at anxieties the public never heard in the songs. 15. Andy Warhol turned himself into one of his own artworks, and nowhere was that more obvious than in his hair. That ghostly silver look was not some random style accident. It was a carefully built persona. Warhol began going gray absurdly young and felt deeply self-conscious about it, so he first dyed his hair, then eventually escalated to the famous wig. He even called it his fright wig, which tells you everything you need to know about how seriously and unseriously he approached the whole thing. But this was more than vanity. The wig made him instantly recognizable, almost logo-like. It flattened him into an icon, reproducible and deliberately artificial, exactly the kind of image his art loved to explore. Instead of hiding insecurity, he industrialized it. He took a personal discomfort and transformed it into brand architecture. That is such a Warhol move, it almost feels unfair. Some people cope quietly. Warhol turned coping into performance and made the performance famous. 16. James Joyce could bend language into shapes that still make readers feel like they are being challenged by an especially smug thundercloud. He revolutionized literature, rewired prose, and wandered fearlessly through the maze of human consciousness. Yet for all that intellectual audacity, he was reportedly terrified of dogs and thunderstorms. The fear of dogs likely traced back to a childhood attack. The fear of thunder came from family influence, including religious warnings that gave storms a divine edge of terror. So here you have one of modernism's towering figures, a man whose sentences could stretch into epic internal universes, potentially being rattled into panic by a barking dog or a rumble in the sky. It is oddly comforting in a way. Genius does not cancel human vulnerability. Sometimes the same brain that can reinvent literature also hears thunder and thinks, absolutely not. I would like to leave this planet immediately and preferably hide somewhere under furniture. 17. Michelangelo created some of the most breathtaking visions of the human body in Western art, which makes it especially unfortunate that he seems to have treated his own body like an inconvenient storage container for artistic obsession. He was notorious for neglecting basic hygiene. Bathing rarely interested him, changing clothes even less, and he often stayed in the same garments for absurd stretches of time while working non-stop. He also wore his boots for so long and so continuously that when he finally removed them, skin reportedly came off too. Just an absolutely cursed detail. He slept in work clothes, lived in grime, and gave the impression that anything unrelated to making art was a boring administrative error. It is both revolting and fascinating. The man carving ideal beauty from marble and painting heaven on chapel ceilings was apparently doing so while smelling like a workshop that had declared war on soap. Renaissance greatness apparently did not always come with ventilation. 18. Alfred Hitchcock made audiences fear showers, staircases, birds, silence, and basically any ordinary object that wandered too close to suspense. Yet his own private horror story involved an item from a breakfast table. He had a powerful aversion to eggs, not a mild dislike. A full, disgusted recoil. He described them as revolting white things, smooth and sealed, and found the sight of a broken yolk particularly horrifying. This is incredible because it means one of cinema's greatest architects of dread was being emotionally mugged by an omelet ingredient. But it also tracks in a strange way. Hitchcock had a gift for spotting menace inside the mundane, and apparently that instinct did not clock out when cameras stopped rolling. Other people saw breakfast. He saw a glossy little biological mystery with no holes and a yellow center trying far too hard to exist. Once you hear that, his movies somehow make even more sense. Fear, for Hitchcock, was always hiding in plain sight. 19. Nikola Tesla helped imagine the electric future, but for all the lightning-level brilliance in his mind, his deepest emotional attachment seems to have gone in a very unexpected direction. Pigeons. Not just general fondness either. This was devotion. Tesla spent money he did not have caring for injured birds, building devices and arrangements for them, and structuring parts of his life around their welfare. At the center of this obsession was one white pigeon in particular, whom he described in terms usually reserved for tragic romance. He said he loved her as a man loves a woman and believed she understood him completely. When she died, he claimed she came to his window and a radiant light shone from her eyes, as if she were delivering a final cosmic message. So yes, one of the men who shaped the modern technological world apparently found soulmate energy in a pigeon. History really does refuse to stay dignified for more than 5 minutes. 20. Alan Turing could crack impossible codes, outthink systems, and help lay the foundations of modern computing, but his daily life was full of tiny logistical wars that he handled with gloriously unconventional solutions. At Bletchley Park, he became so worried someone would steal his personal coffee mug that he chained it to a radiator with a padlock. Not metaphorically, literally. This was apparently the level of trust he extended to co-workers around drinkware. Then allergy season arrived, and things got even better. To deal with severe hay fever, Turing reportedly cycled to work wearing a military gas mask. Picture that for a second. One of the greatest minds of the 20th century pedaling through the English countryside, looking like he was fleeing chemical warfare while heading to break Nazi encryption. It is funny, bizarre, and weirdly fitting. Turing's brain operated at such a high level that ordinary solutions clearly felt too boring, too inefficient, or possibly beneath the dignity of genius. 21. Sigmund Freud spent his life examining dependency, repression, desire, and all the awkward furniture of the human psyche. Which makes it especially funny that in his own home life, he reportedly required an astonishingly basic form of daily assistance. Every morning, his wife Martha was expected to put toothpaste on his toothbrush for him. Not because he was physically incapable, not because it was a charming one-off, because it had become part of the routine. The great analyst of inner life, the man who taught generations to overthink their childhoods, apparently could not begin the day without someone else handling dental prep. The irony is so strong it practically writes itself. Freud spent a career untangling emotional dependence while quietly acting like a Victorian man defeated by toothpaste logistics. It is one of those details that instantly makes a giant historical figure feel hilariously human. Sometimes the explorer of the subconscious still needs help managing a toothbrush before breakfast. 22. Thomas Edison did not just interview people, he ambushed them with soup. If a job candidate made it through the normal questions and looked promising, Edison might invite them to share a bowl. Sounds pleasant, except it was secretly a test. He would watch closely to see whether the candidate added salt or pepper before tasting it. If they did, that was enough to disqualify them. Out the door. In Edison's mind, seasoning untasted soup proved the person relied on assumptions rather than evidence, which meant they were not the kind of careful thinker he wanted. It is arrogant, petty, and honestly kind of brilliant in the most annoying possible way. Somewhere in America, talented people probably lost career opportunities because they liked their soup a little bolder. Imagine explaining that rejection. Sorry, you seemed qualified, but you committed the unforgivable crime of believing broth might need salt. Inventor logic is sometimes just theatrical control wearing a waistcoat. 23. Buckminster Fuller did not experience time the way most people do, which becomes very clear once you learn he liked wearing 3 watches at once. To ordinary humans, that looks like overcommitted jewelry. To Fuller, it was a system. One watch showed the time where he currently was, another stayed set to the place he had just left, and the third tracked the time at his next destination. In other words, he was physically dressed like a man refusing to remain in a single moment. Present, past, future, all strapped to his wrist like a portable philosophy lecture. It actually makes a weird sort of sense for someone whose mind was always leaping across ideas, places, and scales of thought. Fuller did not want to merely arrive somewhere. He wanted to remain connected to where he had been and preloaded for where he was going. Most of us check one clock and feel tired. He turned scheduling into a wearable theory of existence. 24. Queen Elizabeth I ruled during one of England's most famous eras, projecting intelligence, authority, and majestic control. She also had an absolutely disastrous relationship with sugar. In the 16th century, sugar was an expensive luxury, the kind of thing that signaled wealth and status, and Elizabeth consumed it enthusiastically. Candied fruits, sweets, decorative sugar creations, the works. The result was horrific dental decay. Her teeth blackened, rotted, and caused her pain, while her breath developed a reputation nobody would put on a royal portrait. But here is where history gets wonderfully absurd. Because she was the queen, the visual side effects of too much sugar became a status symbol. Members of the elite began darkening their own teeth to imitate the look, hoping to suggest they too were rich enough to ruin their mouths with imported sweetness. Imagine admiring someone so much that you cosmetically copy their dental disaster. Court culture was truly a majestic fever dream. 25. Agatha Christie, queen of the murder mystery, apparently did some of her best plotting in a bathtub while eating apples, which is such a specific combination, it almost feels invented by a novelist trying too hard. But it was reportedly real. She loved sitting in a warm bath for long stretches, calmly crunching apples while mentally arranging alibis, motives, poisonings, and suspicious behavior. This was not an occasional indulgence. It was a full creative environment. She even had a ledge fitted across the tub to hold things she needed, because once murder inspiration strikes, you do not want to be fumbling with plumbing logistics. So while the rest of the world was using baths to relax, Christie was in there building intricate webs of deceit and homicide with fruit in hand. There is something delightfully unsettling about that image. Somewhere between the steam and the apple bites, Poirot and Miss Marple were getting new cases before the water even cooled. 26. Vincent van Gogh did not just suffer for his art in the poetic, metaphorical sense people like to romanticize. At times, he seems to have done it in an alarmingly literal and chemically terrible way. During some of his darkest mental episodes, he reportedly ate his own oil paints. These were not harmless materials. 19th century pigments could contain lead, arsenic, and other toxic substances that were dangerous enough on canvas, let alone inside the human body. The irony is brutal. The same materials he used to create some of the most luminous, life-filled paintings in history were also part of behavior that harmed him. There is nothing glamorous about it, just tragedy wrapped in surreal detail. We often talk about tortured genius as though suffering is some grand aesthetic accessory, but this habit rips that illusion to pieces. It was not romantic. It was a deeply disturbed man in pain, ingesting the very colors he used to fight against the darkness around him. 27. Charles Dickens wrote with the energy of a man whose brain was permanently running a crowded city of plots, voices, and social disasters. To keep that machinery functioning, he developed rituals so oddly specific they sound like instructions from a haunted productivity manual. He obsessively combed his hair throughout the day, carrying a comb with him and using it constantly, as though smoothing his hair might also straighten out the traffic jam in his mind. Then there was the sleep issue. Dickens believed he had to sleep facing north because alignment with the Earth's magnetic field supposedly improved his rest and creative powers. He would use a compass to position his bed correctly, even when staying away from home, rearranging rooms until the direction suited him. So yes, one of literature's giants apparently trusted storytelling, hair grooming, and geomagnetic sleep strategy to coexist in the same daily operating system. Victorian genius really had no interest in appearing normal. 28. For Louis XIV of France, waking up was not a private moment. It was a political event with spectators. His morning rising ceremony, known as the levee, turned the simple act of getting dressed into a ritual of power at Versailles. As the king began his day, a carefully ranked parade of nobles would be admitted into his bedroom in stages, all eager for the honor of witnessing him wash, dress, and generally continue existing. Even the smallest role in this process could become a coveted prize. Handing the king a shirt sleeve was not laundry assistance. It was political theater with lace on it. Up to 100 people might be involved, orbiting around the royal bed like courtiers around the sun, which was very much the point. Louis made his ordinary routines feel sacred and strategic. He did not merely rule France. He made everyone around him compete for the privilege of watching him put on clothes. 29. Beethoven did not warm up for composing by sipping tea and gazing thoughtfully out a window. That would have been far too stable. Instead, he reportedly liked to pace around while dumping buckets of ice-cold water over his head to shock his brain into action. because apparently the route to immortal music ran through self-administered aquatic violence. This habit had consequences beyond personal discomfort. The man regularly soaked his rooms, damaged floors, and created enough chaos to infuriate landlords, who often had to deal with flooding caused by one of Europe's greatest composers trying to summon inspiration like a storm god in a rental property. It is all so aggressively Beethoven. Loud, intense, dramatic, slightly destructive, and impossible to ignore. While ordinary people looked for calm before creative work, Beethoven seems to have preferred electrocuting his nervous system with freezing water and then sitting down to produce music that still sounds like it is wrestling thunder. 30. Marie Curie was one of the greatest scientists in history, but her closeness to her work became terrifyingly literal because the full danger of radiation was not yet understood. Radium fascinated her, especially its eerie blue-green glow, which must have seemed like science had invented magic. She kept radioactive samples in her pockets, stored them in desk drawers, and even placed radium salts by her bedside so their glow could light the darkness like a strange little scientific night lamp. She reportedly found it beautiful, and that is the heartbreaking part. What looked wondrous was also steadily poisoning her. It is one of history's most chilling images. A brilliant mind falling asleep beside a deadly glow produced by her own groundbreaking discoveries. Curie was not being reckless in the modern sense. She was living at the edge of new knowledge, where wonder and danger were tangled together. Science had given her light, and the light was quietly lethal. 31. Glenn Gould played piano with astonishing intelligence and sensitivity, but his personal habits made him seem like a man preparing for a polar expedition that only he could see. He was perpetually worried about cold, illness, and bodily vulnerability, even when everyone around him was sweating in ordinary weather. Gould might show up to a recording session in heavy layers, scarf, coat, gloves, cap, the full dramatic package, while other people were dressed for a normal room on planet Earth. Before playing, he liked soaking his hands and forearms in very hot water for a precise stretch of time, as though warming up for Bach required ritual preparation bordering on alchemy. He also feared catching cold so intensely that handshakes could be rejected, and coughing nearby was treated like an act of aggression. The contrast is unforgettable. Out of this cocoon of anxiety and overprotection came performances of breathtaking clarity. He sounded free, even when he lived like winter was stalking him personally. 32. Pythagoras gave the world one of the most famous mathematical ideas ever written, which makes it especially hilarious that he also seems to have had a full-scale horror relationship with beans. Not a preference, not a dietary fad. A deep, bizarre prohibition, especially against fava beans. His followers were reportedly forbidden from eating them, touching them, and in some stories even walking through bean fields. Why? That is where the madness gets creative. Some explanations said beans contained the souls of the dead. Others linked them to human embryos. None of this helps the beans' public relations. And the legend gets even stranger. When enemies cornered Pythagoras near a field of fava beans, he supposedly refused to flee through it and was captured and killed instead. Imagine that ending. A man who helped reveal the elegant logic of the universe brought down by legumes. History occasionally gifts us details so absurd they feel invented. And this one arrives carrying a sack of beans. So after all that, here's the real question. Which genius in this video was secretly the weirdest human being and who absolutely deserved to be on this list but got robbed? Drop the name and the habit in the comments, because I want the most unhinged examples you've got. And if this video earned a spot in your watch history, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more historical brilliance mixed with total madness.